What's up, guys? Michael Corsentino with my first tutorial for 2019 for Shutter Magazine and BehindTheShutter.com. I'd like to start off by wishing everyone a very happy, healthy, and creative new year. I decided to kick off 2019 with a tutorial about what constitutes great light and how to create it. Okay, so what does that even mean? What does great light mean? It's kind of a nebulous term, and it's going to be something that's different for everyone. But if you ask me what great light is about and how to create it, great light is light that supports the story that you're trying to tell with the image that you're creating. And every image tells a different story, and each story should convey different emotions and feelings. And you do that with light, right? So there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. So great light supports the story, tells a different story for each image, and the way that you do that is by lighting with intent, okay? And that brings us to a discussion of modifiers and the direction of light and quality of light, and how to plug in these various tools and techniques when you're needed to create the right kind of lighting for the right kind of image, right? So here we're looking at two images. You see a very, very different looking quality of light in both of these images. If you look at the image on the left, we've got a very, very soft quality of light for this subject matter, a very feminine, soft image on the left. That's our model Kat. She's awesome. And on the right, we couldn't have a more different quality of light if we tried for a portrait of a boxer, right? Very specular light, very hard quality of light, and a lot more lights going on, right? We've got one light in our soft feminine portrait, and in our boxer portrait, we've got three different lights. And I've used different tools in order to, and techniques in order to create the different divergent qualities of light that we have in both of these images. And both qualities of light support and tell a very different story, right? So that really is goes to, lighting with intent and creating great light. So let's take a look at how I did that. I want to give you guys the technical details behind these images as well, and talk a little bit about what's going on with direction of light, and when shadows were introduced and when they weren't, and reflectors and all sorts of other little bits and pieces that kind of came together to create these images. So on the left, for the soft feminine portrait image, I'm using a really large softbox, a 71-inch Octabank, okay? And it is a unique lighting modifier in that the strobe faces away from the model. It faces into the softbox, which creates an even more diffuse, softer quality of light. Okay, it's called indirect. It's an indirect orientation for the strobe. So it faces away from the model into the softbox and then bounces back from the interior of the softbox back. So it creates a much softer quality of light. And it's also very large, right? So the rule of thumb is basically the larger the modifier and the closer it is to the subject, the softer the quality of light. Now I've done something else with this image in that the softbox is moved just in front. It's placed pretty much perpendicular to the model, and it is just in front of her. So it's working with the light that is falling off the back end of the softbox, and that is called feathering. Okay, and that's it. Just one light, and I believe I had a fill reflector of a V-flat on the camera right side of things, just to fill in some of the shadow side on the shadow side of the model. And that's it, and we create this beautiful soft quality of light. But it really goes to the size of the modifier and the indirect orientation of the strobe. And of course, there's a layer of diffusion fabric on the front of the modifier, and the orientation, and using feathering in order to create that extra. So I'm really bringing to bear everything that I can to create a very soft quality of light for this portrait. All right. Now, conversely, if we look at the image of the boxer, I'm using a very small 22-inch Mola Demi beauty dish with a silver interior because I wanted a smaller modifier placed further away is going to give you a harder quality of light than a bigger modifier placed closer, right? So I'm using that technique. And then I'm I'm making a decision, a conscious decision to choose a silver interior reflector because I know that that silver is going to give me a more poppy, specular, contrasty look, which is going to really fit this subject matter. And again, I'm lighting with intent. I'm choosing tools and techniques that are going to create the image that I want, that are going to tell the story that I want for that image. Again, I'm not just throwing the same thing at everything that I shoot. So in this image, I've got that small beauty dish, and then I've got a silver reflector underneath and kind of a clamshell lighting arrangement underneath the model's torso to bounce light back in, fill in the shadows underneath his eye sockets and underneath his chin. That beauty dish is placed right above my camera position and angled down toward him at about 45 degrees. You can see the catch light in his eyes. And then behind that, I have two kicker lights, two strip boxes with, they're 14 by 35 Ellen Chrome strip boxes. With grids on them. I believe there were 30-degree egg crate grids in order to really confine the light to, just very narrow columns of light that are only going to illuminate the sides of his head. So I've got one right and one left, and there we go. So we've got a very, very different quality of light for both of these images by using different tools and techniques, okay? So we're going to talk a lot about modifiers in this tutorial because they really are the linchpin for creating different qualities of light and for creating great light, which is really what this tutorial is about. Okay, so let's go on to our next slide. Okay, so here again, I said I used a beauty dish for the image of the boxer, but I wanted to show you that even the same tool can create very different looks. So I'm using a beauty dish for both of these images. For this beauty image on the left, I'm using a white interior beauty dish, again, a Molademi beauty dish. And then the boxer is the silver version of that beauty dish, okay? The image of the boxer has no diffusion on the front. So again, I'm creating a much more harder specular look. And the image of the beauty shot of the model has a diffusion fabric on the front of it. It's called a sock. So it creates a much more soft, again, in conjunction with the white interior, a much softer effect. And I'm using a white fill reflector underneath, again, in that clamshell beauty lighting arrangement to create a very different effect. Okay, so same tool, but it's much closer also for a softer effect, right? Okay, so I just wanted to show you that. We're going to talk about this image on the left as well when we talk about the position of our lights. Okay, so I want to talk about the way that you position your light also governs how much shadow is introduced into an image. And shadow is going to create a very different effect and a very different mood than a shadowless image. So here you're looking at two different shadowless images, but they have very, very different qualities of light. And so let's talk about what's going on here. I'm using different tools in order to create this, okay? So on the left, again, I'm using a beauty dish, and you create shadowless light, essentially, for all intents and purposes, shadowless light, by positioning your light and your modifier right at the camera position. And I'm doing this slightly right above the camera position and angled down at 45 degrees for the image on the left, okay? And you get this really beautiful beauty style lighting, clamshell lighting, or the lighting style for the boxer, depending on the way that you do it, right? But they're both kind of shadowless lights. Now, on the right, we also have a shadowless light, but they're very, very different looking. So what's going on? Well, for the image on the right, I used something called a ring flash, okay? And that is a light source that comes directly, it wraps around your lens, and it's a flash tube that wraps around the lens, and it creates a very different look. But they're both, the position of these light sources in both of these images are directly from the camera position, yet they're very different. So just because you think that all shadowless light doesn't have to look the same. This has created a very different quality of light. One is kind of a rock and roll look, and I wanted a definitely more punchy look for this image than the image on the left. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about that for a minute, and let's talk also about diffusion and direction of light. Here you can see that I've got uh, two portraits with very, very soft qualities of light. And that really goes to the use of diffusion. Both of these images rely heavily on diffusion, and they also rely on direction of light. And we're going to talk more about direction of light as we move through this presentation. So on the image in the left, you've seen cat before in our opening slide. For this portrait, I'm using that same really large modifier, that 71-inch octabank, the indirect light orientation, and it's really close, and it's feathered. Again, I pulled that, it's pulled in front of her, so she's working with the back end of that softbox. And you can see here that because the light is to her side, we've got a really nice shadowed effect. We've got, light coming in from the left, and then everything on the right is falling into shadow. And there's a fill card on the left so that we're not completely dark, we're not losing detail, but that shadow creates volume and it creates dimension. And you can see it's a very different look than, let's go back to this, to our shot of our beauty shot, right? So very different look. Just by introducing direction to our lighting, we create a very different mood, what I would consider more kind of editorial look than our more beauty-oriented image. Okay, same thing with the image of Jorge on the right. Right, and they also are using diffusion. The image on the left has a large diffusion fabric front-facing on the softbox and the octabank, and on the image on the right of Jorge, or sorry, Julio, I have used multiple layers of diffusion and neutral density filters. I'm using a Mola Demi Beauty Dish, fired through with a diffusion sock on the front of it, fired through 2 layers of diffusion fabric on a 3x3 sort of scrim, and 2 layers of neutral density filter to knock down the light, because I really wanted to shoot wide open on this. I think I was shooting at like, I don't know, 2.8 or something crazy like that. In the studio, I'm usually much more stopped down than that, but I really wanted to create a kind of a portrait with a lot of focus fall off, so that everything in the front was really crisp, and then it all just kind of fell off, created a really nice effect. Okay, so diffusion and direction of light. Okay, you can see again that on the portrait of Julio, the light is coming in from camera right, and everything on camera left is falling into shadow. And again, there's a fill card so that I still have some detail. That's typically the way that I do it. I don't want everything falling completely pitch black, but I definitely like a shadowed look because it creates dimension, and a kind of a volume and sculpture and drama, which I'm a big fan of. Rather than kind of flat lighting everything, although flat lighting can work, as we saw in the previous slide. All right, what's next? Okay, so when you give direction to your light, it does have an effect on the fullness or lack of fullness, the appearance of your model, of their face. And that is known as broad light and short light. The orientation of the light in relationship to the model's position to the camera is called broad or short light. So I wanted to show that to you and talk about what it does, okay? So if we look at the image on the left, the majority of the light coming from from our key light is hitting the model's face that is oriented toward the camera, okay? You can see that all that light, the lit part of her face, is facing toward the camera, and that is known as broad light. And it creates a fuller appearance to our model's face. So if you're working with someone who's very, very thin, you might want to use this lighting technique, okay? Now, if you're working with someone who has a more full face and you want to thin them out a little bit, you would use something called short light, which we see here on the right, where our model's face, the shadowed part of our model's face, is toward the camera position. All right, so the lit part of her face, the part of her face with the majority of the light, is facing away from the camera. Right? And it could be a little more extreme than this, but the shadowed side of her face is toward the camera, and that is called short light, and that will thin out a subject's face a little bit. And you can also see here the image on the right has a little more shadow to it, a little more drama to it, I'd say, and the image on the left, a little less so, right? So again, your call really depends on the image that you're trying to create. But direction of light will create shadow, and shadow can do different things for you. All right, again, direction of light. Two really prime examples of what you can do with direction of light. Image on the left is a bass player and his family, new baby and his muscle car. And I used a really large scrim for this, 10 by 10 scrim. I think I'm going to 8 by 8 sunbound scrim for this with 3 or 4 strobes fired through it, and then a kicker light on the left with a CTO gel, color temperature orange gel, just to add a little bit more warmth back in from the camera left side of things. And you can see how that direction really creates drama. Rather than putting that light in the front of right by the camera, as sometimes when we're not used to working with lights, we put a flash on top of our camera and just fire away, and we get a very flat looking image. And I wanted to tell a more dramatic story with this image, so I made sure to light from the side, creating a lot more shadow and depth and dimension, right? Same thing with the image on the right of our model Laurel. And again, this image is also about, less is more. The absence of light can sometimes tell as much of a story as a lot of light, right? And in this instance, if I've just blasted this image with a ton of light, I would be telling a very, very different story. So by confining your light using tools like grids and Fresnels and tools that allow you to shape the light and create very confined sources of light, you're able to tell a very different story than if you just kind of like put light everywhere, right? So that is direction of light and quantity of light. Same thing here. Another shot of Laurel on the right. I'm using a Fresnel for this that has blades inside which allow you to shape the light into slats of light and slivers of light, if you will. And you can see how it creates a very dramatic look. And for the image of the band on the left, I'm using a really large, or rather, not really large, a medium-sized silvered interior Profoto deep octa, and I've moved it far enough away, only far enough away that it would cover the entire band, but close enough that I would get a really kind of punchy, specular look. So again, I had tried a few different modifiers, and they weren't really giving me what I wanted. That silver interior softbox placed, and also the deep construction of it that gives you a very kind of a punchier look than a shallow umbrella would. Those are nice softboxes. Okay, let's see it. And here we go. Here's our last slide, okay? I wanted to finish with this just because I love this portrait. This was the last portrait that we made that night when I was shooting these boxer portraits. And it was kind of an afterthought, and this kid just stepped up and said, "Oh, what about me?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And it was the best portrait of the night. But here again, you can see how powerful lighting tools, the power that lighting modifiers and being thoughtful about what you're doing with them can do for you, okay? Very different, than our beauty image, very different than our rock and roll image. Different tools and different techniques will give you different effects. So be thoughtful about what you're doing. Plug in the right tools, give your light direction when it's called for, introduce shadow when it's called for, or not. But think about what you're doing. And, go out there and swing for the fences and be creative, and tag me on Facebook. I'd love to see what you're doing. And that's going to wrap it up for this month's tutorial here on Shutter Magazine, behindtheshutter.com, and I will see you next time.